Good afternoon, Amsterdam. Why are there only two brave souls in the front row here? There isn't a splash zone to this. You're not going to get splashed with data or anything. Yeah. Great to meet you guys and girls. My name is CCP Ghost, and I am going to talk to you today about incredible data and incredible experiences. In April 2016, I had my first FanFest in Reykjavik, Iceland. And that was a really memorable experience for me, mainly because of the chats I had talking with people like in this audience. And actually a few of the people I talked to back then are also in this audience. What surprised me back then was the incredible amount of passion that was radiating from all of these chats when people were telling me about their experience in the game and the life they were leading there. I had just come to CCP from a 4-year stint with the Special Prosecutor's Office in Iceland, where I had spent 4 years interrogating banking individuals for international financial criminal investigations. And when they were talking about their world of finance and money, they did not radiate this passion. And this kept me up at night. Like, honestly, it kept me up. I was like, where does this incredible passion come from? And like, this is so interesting to me. Because I'll admit, I mean, I'm a gamer and I've been a gamer since I was a kid, but I've never had this type of passion with any of the games that I've played. So I wanted to understand this. I'm very interested in human behavior, and I started to try to figure out where this was coming from. And it sort of slowly started dawning on me when I started hearing the stories of the players. And I want to share a couple of them because they are actually quite amazing. The first one was, it was the FanFest after my first FanFest. And I was having an interview with a player who was a really important figure in the new player community, because I was leading the new player team at CCP at the time. So I invited her at the CCP headquarters in Reykjavik, and I was asking her what she knew about. I was asking her to share her experience with getting new players into EVE. And then she told me her story. And I've gotten her permission to share a portion of it, which was that in the year 2011, there was a really bad storm where she lived in the US, which led to pipelines freezing underneath her house, which caused damage to the soil, which eventually led to a portion of her house collapsing. And she was actually in the kitchen when this happened, and she was just lucky to get out alive because a part of the outer wall fell on her. So her house was completely damaged. It had no water, no electricity, and she had to go to the hospital to get fixed up. And when she comes back, she goes to the insurance company and she asks if they, if she's covered for this, and they're like, this is $40,000 worth of damages, and we're not going to pay a single cent because it's just like an act of God type event. So she's sitting there, badly broken, with a house that's pretty much ruined, and she doesn't know what to do. So she does the only thing that she can think of. She goes to her neighbor's house and she asks if she can pull electricity from their house to her house, and she fires up her computer and she goes online to meet with her community in EVE Online. And this is 6 or 7 days after this terrible accident, and she comes on comms, and her corp mates are like, "Hey, where have you been? We've been worried about you." And she's like, "Should I tell them about this?" And she just decides I'm going to open up about this. And the way she explained it, she wasn't going to do it, but she ended up like bawling her eyes out, telling her corpse mate what had happened to her, and that she had no hope for the future anymore. And she was like, the way she described it was like there was just silence for an hour. Everybody was listening. And then when I was done and they realized I was done speaking, one of her corp mates speaks up and he's like, "Where do you live? I'm a lawyer." And the next week, a lawyer shows up at her house, which was the friend of that lawyer, because he didn't live in the same state. And he went to work, who was also an EVE player, by the way. He went to work to help her deal with her insurance company and deal with her medical bills. And he ended up getting the medical bills down to $100, up from like thousands of dollars. And he also ended up getting the insurance company to pay for a big portion of renovating the house again. And she couldn't believe it. And they helped her through with all of this and did not charge her a single penny for this. So to make this very long, interesting story short, her journey then went from, she moved to another state where she got a job through also her Eve Corp, and then she met another Eve member who noticed that she was limping and asked her what was the matter, and she said that she had a bone that was displaced in her foot. And she was like, well, my wife works at an orthopedic surgeon, and they offered her to come back in, and they fixed her leg, so now she doesn't walk with a limp. And I was listening to this story, and I was like, holy smoke, this is like a movie. Like, this is an incredible story you're sharing, and this is all through her community in the game. And this, with many other stories, is what I slowly started to realize, is that this is an actual, really real, meaningful community that you guys and the players have in this. And that is what is being reflected when I'm having these conversations at FanFest and Evesterdam. And there are more stories like this. For example, who remembers reading this one? This is in The Guardian just a couple of weeks ago. So the dude on the right, Sesjan van Heerden, he basically entered a raffle for a bookshop. So there was a guy who had been running a bookshop for 30 years, and instead of selling it, he decided he was just going to raffle it off and see if somebody, he wanted to give somebody a chance to start their own business. And this guy won that raffle. So all of a sudden, he has a bookstore in his hands that he needs to run. And he's like, well, I want somebody with me that I can trust, and that I need somebody to run this with me. So who did he turn to? He turned to his corp mate for 9 years in EVE Online, the Icelander Sveinbjörn Stefán Einarsson, who was 23 years old, and he asked him if he wanted to run a bookstore with him. And he invited him to come over to England, and now they're roommates, and they run a company together. Again, the connections break these boundaries from the virtual world to the real world. And I could tell you hundreds of stories like this. Actually, I'm very fortunate that within my job, I get to hear these incredibly inspiring stories. I want to tell you one more story before we move on to something else, just for context on this. And has anybody ever thought about this? Because I'm assuming most people in here are veterans of the game or have deep experience with it. Have you thought about when you're playing the game if it is actually preparing you for real-world business success? Yes, a couple of people are nodding and raising their hands. Well, we had a wonderful email sent to us at CCP just 2 weeks ago, where a guy says, like, I've been wanting to write this email now for a long time, but I've never had sort of the guts to do it, but I need to get this off my chest. I need to thank you guys. And he shared his story with us through the email. And I also got his permission to copy a portion of the email, because it is actually quite unbelievable. So what he did is, he had been a veteran of the game for years, and he loved playing this game, and he'd been building corporations in it. He was running all these different types of logistical operations, faction warfare, all this type of stuff, and he loved it, and he loved it. And then he's sitting in his chair one day 3 years ago, and he's like, why can't I do this in real life? And then something hits him, and this becomes like a parasite in his brain. He's like, wait, can I maybe do this in real life? And he starts thinking about, like, what have I learned in the game, and how does that translate into actual value in the world? And here we come into his email. So I started to compare things in game versus real life. This is slightly abstract, but relatable. And he throws some examples down. Recruitment for a corporation. That's basically outbound sales in the real world. Corp members. That's customers trusting your corp brand. Trade hubs like Jira or Amar. That's like Amazon or major North American retailers like Best Buy or Staples or MediaMarkt in Europe. Understanding broker fees, fuel costs, export taxes, etc., is how they would be calculated into bottom line profitability. Influence in politics affecting the way people respond to your needs and negotiations. And he's going through this, and an idea is forming in his mind. So he's like, whoa, this is incredible. I actually have a lot of real world business knowledge that I've gotten through the game. So the thought started approximately 2.5 years ago at the tail end of 2016, and I formed my real-life corporation to act as a sales agency within the consumer electronics category to assist international manufacturers who want to enter the retail sector. So 2.5 years ago, he decides I'm going to form an actual corporation, and I'm going to use the business model I'm using in Eve and the knowledge that I'm gaining there. So what happened 2.5 years later? At the time I was broke. Fast forward to today, with an embarrassing amount of coffee cups, loss of personal sanity and hygiene, my company has truly become a living, breathing corporation. Approximately $8 million portfolio of retail sales last year at the end of 2018. Exactly. Operating at an 87% profitability ratio, which is incredible. And bottom line profit of over $400,000 for last year. He went to Eve Business School. So he was gracious enough to allow me to share this with you guys, because this is just amazing to me. This isn't just a computer game. This is an actual, like, living, breathing, community of sci-fi, business, corporation, tycoon, entrepreneurship, like, fill in your role here. And this is what sort of projected me into what I'm about to share with you today, which is like, why is this happening to our players? And what does it mean in terms of data if we start looking at this? So one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to be like, okay, who are these players then that play our game? So I sent out a survey, and 11,500 of our current and ex-players answered that survey. I sent it out to 1.5 million players. And one of the things I did, I asked them, like, who are you? Can you self-describe what type of player you are? And I'm gonna ask you a question, just for mental process for yourself. If you think, like, what type of players mainly play EVE Online or seek out EVE Online? And I asked around at the company, I was like, what type of play styles do you think most people will say? And almost everybody said the same thing. It was always gonna be like aggressors or people that like to do combat, because that's a little bit what we're known for, right? We're ruthless. But actually, as it turns out, most of our players self-describe themselves as helpers. So they could choose 2 categories, and 44% said that I like to help others is the main way that I would describe myself as a player. This really blew my mind, and I wasn't expecting this. And I was like, okay, I wonder why. Like, that isn't fitting, like, the image that I have of this game. So I wanted to delve deeper into this. And I was like, I wonder if there's a difference between the behavior of those that self-describe as helpers versus those that self-describe as, explorers or combat or resource. And yes, there's actually a difference. For example, the helpers have the highest engagement. These are the minutes per session on average. And the helpers have 95.5 minutes on average session, compared to, for example, the explorers who have 79.7 minutes. So the helpers also play more. And I started delving deeper into this, and I was like, what do these surprising results mean for us? And I wonder how this translates. If we have a game that the biggest demography that's entering the game is people that say that I primarily am a helper, can we see that in the game? So I started looking at connected players, because that's the first spot that I could think about looking at. And that translated also through all of these stories that I've been hearing. And there I found this out, that connected players in the game are more engaged, they're more satisfied, and they have higher tenure. So I sent out surveys asking players, like, how satisfied are you? And all these type of questions. And then I could translate that back to who in the game are connected via, like, corp, join fleets, are active on chat, stuff like this. And this is what I found out. And I'm like, okay, I'm onto something here. So we kept exploring, and I wanted to understand why. So because I have a lot of interest in behavioral science, I started looking through psychological theories, and actually I started finding answers there. So some of you are probably familiar with this, but it's often said that there are 4 key motivations that you need to be happy with how you spend your time in life, at work. And if you don't have all of these 4, the chances are increasingly that you're not happy with how you spend your time. So I tested this against our players, and I was like, I wonder how we score on this after I'd been looking at all this data. So the first one is extrinsic motivation, stuff like money. So in Eve, that would be ISK, right? So definitely we have that. The second thing is mastery, the urge to get better and better at something that matters. Eve probably has this more than almost any other video game. A high level of mastery to pursue. I mean, the game is relatively complex to get into, and there's an almost endless curve where you can, increase your level of mastery. So Eve definitely has this in spades. So what's the third thing? The third thing is autonomy, the desire to direct our own lives. Again, Eve has this probably more than any other video game. I mean, there are very few games where you can come in and be like, do I want to be a pirate? Do I want to be a space tycoon? Do I want to be a trader? Do I want to lead alliances or be a political leader? I mean, the freedom to pursue what you want is really, really high. But the fourth one is the one that's most difficult to fulfill. And for most people that are not happy with how they spend their time, it's usually because they're not fulfilling the fourth one, which is purpose, the yearning to do what we do in the service of something greater. And after the stories that I just shared with you, and what I started seeing in these surveys, I was like, there's something here. So I decided I'm going to specifically pursue understanding this. So I decided I was going to find the elite players of our game, so and basically talk to them personally. So I looked at our data, and I looked at the top 1% of players in categories like destruction, running corps, playtime, connections, chat activity, ISK, wealth, stuff like this. And I found I found a demographic of players who I'm like, okay, what I can be sure if I talk to these players is that they know what the game is about, and they've succeeded at it, and they've found something interesting in it. So, and I summoned these people for interviews, either at CCP headquarters or via just Skype. And this, I can tell you, is the most fun I've ever had at any job. It was the few weeks that I spent interviewing our elite players. And I'm going to share some of what I learned about that amazing group here. So, a couple of quotes here. These are direct quotes, not changed at all from the interviews. I don't give out the names of the players, but I give out a basic profile of it. The first one is this. You develop social networks. I'm flying with the same crew for 10 years, and the reputation you develop, the stuff you build together, it's not just a computer game, it's a world with a social network. It's a virtual world. And this is from a player who's a 12-year veteran in the game and leader of multiple corps and alliances. So this is when he's explaining, like, why have you lasted so long in the game? Why do you play so much? So the next one. I want to teach people what Eve is about, which is to find meaning in something like building relationships and finding connections. This is from a 6-year veteran with an extensive experience in building new player communities. We became hardcore because we made these social connections, not the other way around. This is from a leader of a very aggressive, long-standing, successful corp and alliance, and I could go on and on and on like this. Almost with every single explanation of, why are you a successful elite player and why do you enjoy the game so much, some element of this was explained. So who are these elite players that I was talking to? What is their profile? Well, the average activity for them is playing the game 4.4 hours a day. Now you can measure yourself, see if you're elite here. The average tenure for them is 7.1 years. They've been playing the game for just over 7 years. And the next one really blew my mind. I guessed this before and I was way off. The average number of alt accounts is 13. Now, just for my own curiosity, because I had guessed 4, shows how much I know. How many people in here can actually say that they have this number or higher? Oh yeah, wow. It's like 20% of the people. It's amazing. Yeah, so these are hardcore players, right? So what did I learn more from them? What characterizes these people? Well, first, connections are absolute key in who they are and also how they became elite. This was very interesting to me. So I always want to be indispensable to my corp. This is important because it wasn't all about like, I want to dominate and lead others. Usually that was not the drive. It was, I want to be relied upon and I want to be indispensable. I want to, when other people need me, I want to be there. That was much more common explanation than I want to lead others to do something. After I started connecting with players, I started building alts to expand my network. Now this is another interesting theory, or another interesting insight is, it isn't until the connections are made that they're like, now I have more opportunities. Now I can do this. Now I can share my experience. Now I can, and that's when sort of their opportunity map started to expand. It wasn't until I joined the corp that things clicked. I think that is true for most players. When that corp quit, for example, that corp quit, I quit the game. But I came back eventually and formed a new corp. The first time I realized this game was for me and I would stick around was when a group depended on me for an important task. Again, somebody depended on you. When you're involved with others and people are relying on you in a changing environment, then it moves from a game into a hobby. Connections go beyond the game quite easily because of the immersiveness of Eve. Eve has kept immersive connections better than any other game. This is very important to me. I am a diplomat. I like building connections. I enjoy the game more when I'm helping others achieve their goals. Eve lets you play the game that way. And you're probably starting to realize, or at least at this point, I was starting to realize that this is something other games mostly cannot offer at this depth. That's the cool thing, and that's what we're going to explore a little bit more. So, what are the characteristics of these people? They have a Titan. Yes. Is this a poor choice of pictures? They are the Titans. No. So they actually. The interesting thing was when I started interviewing them is almost all of them had these characteristics, and they just slowly emerged. I wasn't really looking for this when I started talking to them. One is that they're social. They either consider themselves as helpers, accommodators, or reliable. Definitely some of them are like aggressive alpha leader type characters, but most of them had this. They're also willing to put in hard work. This is important because I'll get to this a little bit later, but they are not afraid of challenges. They are resilient, and the awesome thing about this, I was interviewing a player from Australia he's a trader in his actual job in life, and he had come to FanFest in Reykjavik, and he was like, "Hey, can I bring my girlfriend to the interview? Is that okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And he came in and he started explaining his journey into the game, and his girlfriend is just sitting next to us. And once he's done sort of explaining his journey, which was very similar to a lot of other journeys I'd been hearing about, his girlfriend is like, "Whoa, this is so amazing." I was like, "What? What you just described is the exact 5 markers of resilience." And it turned out his girlfriend was a psychologist. And she was like, "This is what I train, like my job is I train corporation in this stuff every day." And he just described exactly what I try to train, executives to adopt so they can be successful in business. And when I took those 5 markers that she had given me and I retroactively applied them to the interviews I had done, and then I tested them on the interviews I was about to do, every single person had them, which is very interesting. And the final thing is they're goal-oriented. Now, my initial conclusion from this was we need to find more of these type of people, because that's what our game is made for, right? Well, no. Well, I mean, yes, I mean, these are excellent type of people to have, absolutely. But actually, when I started talking more to them and I started following up on them, the game seems to create these types of people. And that is what blew my mind. Because when they were describing themselves, they were like, I didn't come into the game, even being social, or like I wasn't resilient, or like in other games when I had failure, I just immediately quit. And I was like, wait, so are you telling me that because you went through the game, you started developing more of these type of, which I would say all of these are very positive character traits. And almost everybody that I talked to was like, yes, I've become more like this because of the game. A few of them were like, no, I've always been like this. And those were people that came into the game like this. But this really, really kind of broke my head. I was like, so wait, if you persist in Eve, it starts to, improve or add new character traits. And this is kind of very fitting with the story that I told you at the beginning from the guy who started his business, right? So this is where I next went on my journey through all of this. And I was like, what are the recurring themes then for how they become elite? And that was an interesting journey as well. The first one is, of course, like I've gone through now a lot, social connections are key reason for why they are elite players. The next quote is it's my favorite quote out of everything that happened in this. This person, he just like, this isn't edited for anything. He just phrased it like this. And this is also Hilmar, the CEO's favorite quote. He was like, he describes the game so perfectly. The point when you move from being just a monkey in the universe to understanding the meta game is why wars break out, why logistics are important. That is when I started to want to gift my knowledge of the game onwards to teach players why they are important. I love this quote. It sends like chills down my back. And this person, I think, captures really well what is happening to these people. This is another quote here. My friends in the game are more important than to gain ships, wealth, or power. And I was kind of surprised because this was one of the first interviews. I was like, really? I mean, don't you play the game to, get more ships and be able to destroy more stuff? And he was like, well, originally, yes, but now it's completely shifted. So, what did I press now? All right, thanks. Thanks, random Eve player. The second thing, which was a recurring theme, was they pursue ambitious goals, right? So what does that mean? If there's something impossible, I want to get it. I had so many variances of this answer. What started my drive in the game was that I saw the top reward in the Caldari LP store, which was a Raven ship, and I decided I want to get it. Now, anybody here that knows if you're coming into the game and you don't have a lot of money, pursuing this goal takes a lot of grinding, a lot. It is so important to feel like you're a part of something and that you can influence it. All right, what was the third recurring theme? They are resilient, right? I like the smack in the face complexity of the game. So another theme was that they are in player-run corporations. 94%. Pretty much everybody are in player-run corporations compared to 74.4% of the total. So now this is moving into the social structure of the game, which are usually corporations. So I decided, okay, I need to understand a little bit better what happens in corporations, and we moved on to that. So is there a difference between players in corps and players that are not in corps? Yes, there's actually a tremendous difference. For example, players in corps have higher satisfaction ratios, 77.2% than those not in corps, which is 65.8%. This is a significant difference. Also, players in corps, they play longer. 52.5% of them play more than 11 hours a week, compared to only 26.6% of those that are not in corps. So, what can I tell you? Now this starts to become, I think, valuable for you guys, about running corps, recruiting, and retaining players. Does anybody want information on that? All right, let's see if we can make you better corp recruiters, or at least give you some info that might help you if you don't know all of this already, because I've mainly learned this from you guys. So one thing is that players coming into the game are not actually ready to join a corp, but they do want to be sought out for one. And this is probably, out of everything that I'm going to share with you guys today, this is probably the most valuable input that I can leave you with for how you grow your corp, is that it matters how you are exposed to social connections, because new players should be sought out and they should be given a role and a purpose. And there's a massive difference from if you come and you invite somebody into your corp, or if you just wait for them to apply. How much of a difference? Out of the roughly 50%, out of the half of new players that are not in player corporations, 58% give reasons for not being in player-run corps that indicate that they are simply not ready or they do not want to join them. So that is one fact. But if players are sought out to join, they're actually more likely to stay. You are 2.5 times more likely to become inactive if you join the corp by applying yourself, while you're 2 times more likely to be active if you joined one through getting support from a corp. Now this is like multitudes in difference. And I looked into a little bit why this is, and there are a lot of reasons that explain this. One is just if I apply for something and I go through the hassle of it, I come in with a certain type of expectation. Now I'm here, this corp should serve my needs, versus like if I'm a monkey in the universe and I'm just flying around and I don't know what to do, and then somebody shows up and they're like, hey, do you want to join us on a mining run? Or we see that you're trying to do this. Would you like, we're fleeting up and we're going to do something super exciting. I think we could give you a ship and help you out. And I'm not like, wow, somebody wants me. I'm just a monkey in the universe. Like, this is pretty awesome. And it just completely changes, for example, your expectation level. And the second thing is just people want to be sought out for stuff. It makes you feel special. But and this is another really interesting one. We could spend the entire presentation on just this slide. So I wanted to understand: is there a difference between retention on first of all, if you're in a corp and not, and second of all, like, is there a certain size of a corporation that's more that's better at keeping players than not? So I asked the analytics team to help me figure this out, and they gave me back this graph here. So what you're looking at is the bottom line here shows, this is not by size because these are just players that are not in player-run corp, and the retention ratio for them is about 35%. As soon as you join a corp, your retention ratio jumps to between 80 and 90%. So the yellow line here is players that are in corps but not alliances, while the orange line is players that are in corps that are also in alliances. So first of all, the difference between being in a corp and not being in a corp is obvious. Probably no news to you guys. But then it's like, okay, a one-person corp has really good retention ratio. What about 2 to 5 player corps? Yes. Actually, they're pretty stable all the way until 90. This is really interesting to me. And this data is so fresh. They only got it 3 days ago. So I haven't delved into this, and I would love feedback from you guys later on in Evesterdam as to why this happens. But at the 90-person level, so when you have a corp that has more than 90 members, the retention ratio for those that are not in alliances drops about 20%, down to almost 60%. And it doesn't really recover beyond that. But although it drops a little bit for the alliance one also, but not as dramatically. I've asked a few people so far, like, why is this? The main hypothesis I've received is just it's very difficult as soon as you reach a certain size of a corp to run it. It's more complicated. And also, like, you as an individual maybe feel less special if the corp is getting too big. But then again, it doesn't seem to influence as much those that are in alliance structures. So this is really interesting to me, and this is one of the things we in analytics are now trying to understand better. And then we come to this, trust. Trust is a social lubricant, and I cannot overstate how incredibly important it is. I could have tens of pages of quotes where the elite players were talking about this. If you cannot trust the guy flying next to you, you're effectively on your own. I really like this quote. And if you're on your own, why are you flying in a multiplayer game? Deep trust forming is accelerated in dangerous, ruthless situations. This is something we know. And this is something, for example, that's very known in military and in warfare. Why do soldiers sign up to continue their stay in combat zones when they have a wife and kids waiting at home? When you ask them about it, it's never because I hated the enemy or because we were fighting for this awesome cause. It's always because of the dude next to me, because the trust-forming bonds that they had formed are so strong. And now we're starting to get onto something. Okay, why is Eve so good in this? And so when I asked you guys, almost everybody agreed that trust building in corps happened through getting people into fleet. All right. So what do we know about then fleets? From July 2018 to March 2019, 23.5% of our active players joined fleets. But only 9.6% of new players joined fleets. And the probably even more concerning number there is that those new players that join fleet, they almost all do it within the first month. And basically, if you don't join a fleet in the first month as a new player, you don't join one at all. And if you never joined a fleet in EVE, you're missing a really, really big part of the experience. So what I can point you out here is that you have a 90.4% opportunity space of getting new players into fleet, like most of them do not. And this is very, very important because player established fleet roams are by far our best retention mechanisms. If you want to get people to join EVE and stay in EVE, you get them to join player-run fleets. Data and research suggests that some of the most powerful onboarding experiences we have in terms of retention in the game are player-established fleet roams for new players in a mentorship style. And the next one I'm going to show you is a direct quote from a person that had run these type of fleets for 6 years. In the case of our alliance, they started doing this fleet roams for newbies in 2006. By 2015, we had nearly 10,000 pilots take one of their classes. Looking at activity levels of several thousands of those former students at one point, 82% of those players were still playing 1 year later. And that held true all the way back to 2006. Now, I did not believe these numbers when I got them. I was like, no way. There's nothing we can do at CCP that comes even close to this. But then I started talking to other newbie recruiters that have been running these type of fleets. They didn't have 82%, that's the highest number that I saw, but they had numbers like 65%, 58%. We're talking about retention ratios for 1 year for those that came through their fleet program. These are incredibly high numbers. And then not only that, but they showed me their statistics, they showed me their data, they showed me like their manuals that they have for this. And I was like, wow, these guys really, really put in the effort to integrate new players into their corps. CCP doesn't have any initiatives for new players that come close to these type of success rates. So this is where the magic is happening in the game. And this is why we want to further support the community in your efforts to build better, more accessible fleets and corps with, for example, the Fleet Finder, which CCP Psych has been introducing here. And then we had this. We try to get them to die with us. That is the most important moment. I hear you guys are laughing. Is this all familiar to you guys? Yeah, you know about this. I'll admit, and this is part of maybe my arrogance in approaching the new player experience, that initially I was like, what? No. You don't want people to die early because then they feel like the game is stupid. But there is something magical that happens when you die with others. It's a trust-forming experience. It's some sort of magical social lubricant. And I wanna spend time on this because I didn't understand this. It took me a time to figure this out. The elite, every single one of them, there was not a single exception to everybody I interviewed, have experienced deep emotional events in the game, but the negative ones have been key shapers early on. So every one of them was like, yeah, within my first 3 months, I had some horrible, I lost my ship that I've been, it took me 6 weeks to build. Like this guy, I spent my first 2 months mining to get a Hawk. Then I got greedy, took it to null, and lost the Hawk. This was a key moment. I realized how much time it cost. This gave me drive and dedication, and I decided that I have to learn more so I don't make the same mistakes again. How many people in here can relate to this story? It's almost everybody. It's amazing. Yeah, that's what I suspected. So what I was surprised about here, because this didn't fit with my data. That's the problem I had. The data I had, because I had recently run surveys on new players, and I had been extensively looking into new players, and that data told me the opposite story. If you experience devastating loss too early, you leave the game. So now I have a problem, right? I have two types of people. One, people that experiences devastating loss and they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to hunker down and I'm going to make some awesome stuff. And the other players are like, no, screw this, I'm going home. So I was like, I need to understand what is the difference here. And as it turns out, there are three very clear distinctions from why you fall into one or the other categories. The first one is understanding. Do you understand what happened to you? You're flying your ship and you get gate camped and it's destroyed. And you're like, wait, what the hell was this? What happened? But if you're like, well, I should have been cloaked. I shouldn't have been autopiloting, something like that. You immediately like, okay, I could have done something about this. And this isn't just CCP stupid games fault. Actually, this was my fault. This is very important. The second thing is a ray of hope that you can respond or get back on your feet. Did your ship have everything you own? Or did you just put in a market order and tomorrow morning you're going to get 100 million ISK back? Do you have some sort of ray of hope to get back on your feet? This is, again, very important. But the third, and by far the most important variable in this, is social support. Now I get killed. I've been training my ship for 5 weeks. I've only been playing the game for 7 weeks. I'm super psyched, then I get killed. I understand what happened to me. And, I have a 50 million ISK market order coming in tomorrow, but I feel super lonely. I don't know, this was going to be my ship that I was going to take and show the world what I was going to do. What do I do? Versus I have 3 or 4 friends in the game and we've been playing a corp and I can go and I can cry to their shoulders I don't know what happened to me and this was so unfair. And they're like, oh, let's find these bastards and kill them together. And hey, we'll lend you a new ship. And the mistake you did is you didn't have any shields up when you did this. But that's fine. And so they provide understanding. They provide the ray of hope and they provide this unity. This, I'm a part of a team. I'm a part of something bigger. I have a purpose. Now, after I realized this, and after the data backed this up, I was like, whoa, holy smokes. This is applicable to real life. So think about it. The next time you or somebody you know has a devastating loss, you lose your job or something horrible happens, why do some people just completely fold while other people are like, no, I'm going to continue? Apply these filters, and I'm pretty sure you'll find your answer. Did they understand what happened to them? Okay, I got fired, but I've been showing up drunk for work for 6 weeks, so yeah, that's, Or are they like, I've been doing an awesome job, and everybody told me I was doing awesome, and I have no idea what I was fired. This is a big thing. Do they have a ray of hope? Okay, I got fired, but I have recruiters looking at, they need people like me. I'm fine. Or is it I was the only person in the world that knew this job, and there's no other jobs like it? And the biggest thing, do you have a supporting wife or husband? Do you have friends? Do you have an Eve community that you can turn to? This is what's going to dictate if you fall off your feet completely or if you continue going. So the profile is getting super interesting and deep at this point, right? And so one of the last things I want to leave you with is, how do people actually form friendships in the real world? Because that's the final thing I wanted to understand. Why do such deep, meaningful friendships form in Eve? Why are they so deep? And actually, again, if you look to psychology, we have a pretty good theory for this, which is called human interaction theory, or it's more informally known as the friendship formula. And the friendship formula says that if you want to establish strong social connections that lead to friendships, you need 4 things. You need proximity, frequency, duration, and intensity. And actually, as a fun side note, this is something that the CIA uses when they're establishing trust with sources in other countries. So when a field agent is trying to get a person to trust him so he can eventually betray his country, the CIA uses this. I'm not using that example to tell you to screw people over. I'm using that example as they've realized that this is efficient and this is what it takes. But let's look at them in more depth. So the proximity. Proximity is the distance between you and another individual and your exposure to that individual over time. So me and the gentleman here at the front row, we're trying to become friends. If if I'm at the stage and he's sitting over there, the distance is much bigger than if I sit next to him. Also, if I'm just calling him on the phone from Iceland, the distance is much greater than if I meet him at his house. This is the difference. So the more proximity, the better. Second thing is frequency. It's the number of contacts you have with another individual over time. So again, sorry, what's your name? Anders. So me and Anders are trying to become friends. But if I only meet him at Evesterdam once a year, it's unlikely that we would become deep friends. We, probably more of acquaintances. But if I move to Amsterdam and we meet every week, it's way better. It's going to accelerate the process. Duration is the third thing. The length of time you spend with another individual over time. So me and Anders, we meet frequently in proximity, but every time we meet, it's only for 1 second at a time. We're not going to build a meaningful connection. But if it's for an hour each week, then we're much closer to it. But the fourth thing is by far the most important element to this, and that's also the most difficult one, and that is intensity. Intensity of the connection greatly accelerates the formation of the friendship. And this is what I think Eve excels at. Because Eve offers such intense connections with like, hey, we're risking it all. We're risking the last 2 weeks of our lives, which we spent building up this fleet, this force. We're going to risk it all together tonight. Or we got betrayed by our, comptroller and the person holding the wallet. He betrayed us. He's been our friends for 6 years. So now he's leaving the rest of us with this unified bond of we have this enemy that we need to get back at. And this is what I've repeatedly come back to, is that Eve managed to create super intense emotional moments. Which is why, if you look at this and you're thinking about how does my corp do on forming good, meaningful friendships, apply these filters and think about it. And I would be sure to say that when you guys have had intense wars, that's when you've been forming the strongest bonds. And that's when you've gotten the most loyal recruits and the most meaningful friendships. So what is an anti-pattern to this? Because Eve isn't all awesome friendship making. Definitely not. And we have some anti-patterns to this. And recently it has been the war declaration system. So what happens when they start undermining this social construct? So when a system like the war declaration system has, to a degree, it's not all bad, of course, working against these social cohesions, it can become incredibly destructive and expensive. So just like with everything else we've been figuring out at CCP, this was pointed out by you guys before we realized how bad it was, that we needed to do something about war declarations, which is why CCP, FOSSI, and Team 5.0 have been hard at work at improving that system now. So the war declaration system had actually started to encourage gameplay that was A, turning away new players, and B, incentivizing away from forming new social bonds. And this was happening in a way where me and Anders, we finally have gotten a hold of the game, we understand how it works, and we want to form a corp together, and we form it with the rest of the people on row one, and we call ourselves the row one people, and we're like an awesome corp. But as soon as we start to become successful, we basically start to get noticed in the game, and we join like success lists in the game, which were being targeted by some playstyles of the war declaration system, which meant that new players were being war decked as soon as they sort of gotten a chance to understand the game, and then they had no way of getting out of it as long as the war declaration party was willing to continue to pay for it. Which meant that, and we saw this through data, repeatedly new players left the game. When they were being war decked, their activity ratios went down, and they never recovered. So we were like, this is undermining these beautiful social mechanics that the more veteran community has been allowed to experience. We need to do something about this. And just because the name of this lecture is Incredible Data, I'm going to show you some of the data that we found out. So in 1 year, which we looked at, war declaration activity, only 4% of the wars did the defender make any kills. So this was completely one-sided experience. And one of the things we want to do with our economy is that we have a healthy ratio of risk and effort versus reward. And obviously that was not happening here. And the average ISK loss to the defender in wars where kills are made was 1.5 billion ISK, which was way higher than anybody at the company had guessed. And here is a lot of extra data for you guys. I'll leave this up for a few seconds before I go through it, but the story it basically tells is that this was contributing to a very one-sided experience in some cases. Of course, not at all, every case. But this is one of the drive that CCP, FOSSI, and Team 5.0 have had for wanting to fix this. So, what are the results to the initial changes to the war declaration system? The initial changes in December were just small. Much bigger changes are coming, like FOSSI has been showing you guys. But what we seem to be seeing is that corp membership ratios overall and new player joining corps have been rising since we made these changes. And the community feedback so far has been good, which is wonderful and beautiful. And this is one of the key KPIs we have for moving forward with war declarations. So, pulling this all together now, what does this all amount to? What this all amounts to, this long journey that the analytics team has been in trying to understand friendships and connections in the game. And I've started to refer to EVE Online in-house at CCP as the friendship machine, because that's pretty much what I found out. It's an incredible friendship machine. And all of these insights, they have led to a couple of initiatives with us. One is that we want to pursue the Fleet Finder that CCP Psych showed you, because we believe that improving tools to make fleets more accessible, easy to form, and easy to join is going to hopefully accelerate this awesomeness that I've been sharing with you. Another thing is, like we went through the war declaration overhaul. This was contributing into the dialogue of why it is important that we target that powerfully. And we are now also exploring a lot of options. And so this is where I want to end, and I want to kind of throw the ball to you guys, is we all agree that more players are more content and more options for more connections and deeper experiences and better game. Right? I hope that we all agree on this. So we want to hear from you now, because you are the experts, because if anything is clear with my presentation here is that every single super awesome insight that we eventually found out from this originally came from you guys. We sent you guys surveys, we interviewed you, we talked to you at FanFest or Evesterdam, and you told us something that we were like, whoa, this is interesting. We need to go back and understand this better. So my question to you and our question to you is, how can we support you bringing in more players, improving the connections in the game with the players, and building more and better, deeper, meaningful relationships? So please tell us, because this is something we're really focused on and interested right now. We want to understand, like, how do we need to improve the corp system? How do we need to improve fleets? How do we need to improve access to content? I don't know. There are loads. I'm sure you guys know more about this than me. And this is where I want to end it. I hope you have enjoyed seeing all these nerdy data points. I have probably enjoyed it way more than you, just figuring this out. It was awesome, and thanks for being such a wonderful audience.